Thank you for the introduction and good morning. Yes. So I've got the easy question on the agenda. What does the energy market look like going forward? So it's a tough question to answer, but let's have a go, see what we can do. So today I'd like to achieve three outcomes if I can. Firstly, I'd like to inform you about aspects of the energy market that you may or may not be aware of. The second thing I'd like to do is inspire you to accept and embrace the change that we're facing. And the third thing I'd like to do is challenge you. So there's no such thing as a free lunch. So I'd just like to put some challenges out to you. So the agenda today I'd like to cover off is firstly just start with a bit of audience intelligence gathering, which I'll go through in a sec. Then I want to talk about the insights around the energy market. Then we talk about implications, and then we'll talk about next steps. So in terms of audience intelligence, just by way of show of hands, how many have been to how many were at last year's Procurement Australia's conference? Okay. How many have attended more than 3 Procurement Australia conferences? More than 5? 14? Okay, good. How many of you have rooftop solar on top of your house? How many of you, the organisation that you work for, has rooftop solar somewhere in their complexes? Yes? Good. How many own a lawnmower? It'll all come clear soon. It'll all come clear. Trust me. Thank you. And thinking about your energy market knowledge, on a scale 1 to 3, 1 being novice, 3 being sort of an expert, how many would rate themselves as a 1, as a novice? 2, sort of middle of the ground. And 3, super enough to be dangerous. Okay. Talking about procurement, energy procurement is actually, I think, quite a fascinating area. So if you're looking for a career opportunity, I couldn't commend energy procurement as one of those fields that's it's very challenging, fast-moving, and keeps you awake at night. But let me talk about some insights. Firstly, what I'd like to do, I presented this story last year, and I'd just like to update it a little bit, but I want to walk you through our energy policy journey in Australia. We started off with John Howard. He announced we should have a nuclear energy review, and Ziggy Zakowski led that review. Then in 2009, we had a change of government, Kevin O'Rudd and his team. We had a carbon pollution reduction scheme. Change of Prime Minister. In 2011, we had the Clean Energy Act. 2014, change of government, new policy, direct action. Then we had the Warburton Review, which was questioning whether we should have a renewable energy target program. In 2015, it was decided we should retain it, but we modified it. In 2015, change of Prime Minister, we then had the emissions intensity scheme. 2017, we thought we should get our chief scientists involved, and that led to the so-called Finkel Review. 2017 again, we had then the clean energy target. And then we had the retail electricity pricing inquiry because prices were getting out of control. Then we had the National Energy Guarantee in 2018. Then we had a change of Prime Minister, and we're bringing down energy prices, policy, whatever that meant. 2019, we actually now have the first leg of the National Energy Guarantee. I'm not sure you're aware of this. It actually has gone live from the 1st of July, which puts more responsibility on retailers to purchase dispatchable power. We're now having another inquiry into nuclear power. And finally, we've got our chief scientist back again to look at hydrogen and how that may transform Australia. So it's fair to say that Australia has had a rocky road in trying to find its energy policy. So the consequence of that is price. So this is a 20-year history of the electricity spot prices across each of the states. You can basically see that from 4 or so years ago, prices have now moved up to call it $80, $100 a megawatt hour, which in layman's terms, that's 8 cents or 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So we've seen a profound increase in price due to both the LNG gas market on the east coast of Australia becoming globalised, and therefore we've seen a reassessment of the value of that price, and we've seen power prices equally feeling the change that we're going through. So let me introduce you to the duck curve. You're going to hear a lot about this. There's a couple of concepts I'm going to talk about today, but the first one is the duck curve. So we've stolen this from California, and it deals with the issue of how our low profile during the day is going to shape through. So this is a plot of time of day across the bottom axes, and then what we're having is all the solar generation coming in the middle of the day, which gouges out the middle of the day load. So that has consequences. And so what happens is we see prices in the middle of the day are subject to be pushing down because demand is off, because all the rooftop solar, all the large grid solar is chugging out when it's a sunny day. However, once we move into the evenings, we're not benefiting from the solar. And so therefore prices are going to move up in those evenings. So the 6 p.m. classical peak is very exposed to this dynamic, as much as the midday price will go the other direction. So looking at the midday prices and around it, this is a chart of the number of negative spot prices since early 16. So a negative spot price means that you are actually being paid to consume. So I think that's a good idea. That's actually what's happened. So these occurrences are very few, but they are growing. And most notably, they're in South Australia and Tasmania. So what if we had these so-called negative prices or low prices? What would that mean for you? The first thing is that organisations will learn to change and adapt. Because if I told you the price during the middle of the day is really cheap, your organisation is going to think about, how can I capitalise on top of that? Or indeed, if I get paid to consume, how good is that? What am I going to do? How can I do that? The next thing would be, think of the productivity that could bring to the Australian economy if we actually had some very low prices during the middle of the day. And then you say, yes, but that's a long way off. Well, let me take you back to last Wednesday when I prepared this presentation. This is the dashboard that AEMO, the market operator, publishes. In Queensland, at the time I did this in the afternoon, negative $96 a megawatt hours of price. So any consumer consuming on that time was effectively being paid to consume. Moved down into New South Wales, Vic and SA, a whole $9. Moved down to Tassie, it was $13. 25 minutes later, we were still seeing these sort of prices, and we saw New South Wales, Vic and SA move down to $0. 1 hour, 40 minutes later, Queensland joined the rest of the mainland states, and it too was at $0, and Tassie was still at 13. So these low prices are actually occurring now. The trouble is you don't know about it, and your organisation is not able to position and capitalise from it. So that brings us back to the duck curve. So that's the good news. The bad news is the evening prices. So what's going to happen? These are going to take off and are taking off. But every opportunity arises out of these situations. So it's a classical buy low, sell high. Great concept. A lot of people like to make money out of that. But it's certainly ideal for storage devices. So if you had some sort of battery device, or organisations which run hydro plant, what they're trying to do is arbitrage this. They'll buy low and sell high. A perfect opportunity. Looking at that evening peak, that's going to create stresses. We're going to see an increased price risk for you, and we're going to see the grid itself being tested during these times. It also creates problems for baseload generation. Baseload generation loves to run 24/7. However, if this sculpting during the middle day gets so deep, what we're going to face is this plant starts to become unreliable. It doesn't like ramping up and down. It'll trip, and trip will cause volatility. Volatility will lead to higher prices. So we are having quite a challenge working out, if this was to occur, whether whether we'll see baseload plant actually retire early. So Australia has a number of baseload plant that's coming to the end of its 50-year economic life. The most notable and most publicised is Liddell Power Station, owned by AGL in New South Wales. But there's an avalanche of them coming thereafter. What we'll find is this duck curve will probably test the economic viability of this baseload plant. So the notion we have baseload plant into the 2030s is probably quite flawed in its thinking around what commercially and financially will actually be delivered. So, the duck curve, it's growing. The duck's getting bigger, or its back is arching more, I'm not sure which. The chart on the left shows you all the proposed projects in the grid. Not all these will get up, make no mistake. The amount of generation this is about twice what's installed today in the total grid. But many of them will. And this excludes one of the biggest generators in the market, the rooftop solar. That's how big it's become. But we are certainly having an avalanche of renewable projects coming. So what's the implications of all that? Firstly, it's true to say we are at risk that lights will go out. We've had some press just recently talking about the pending summer. There is no doubt we are running tighter and scarier than we have done in the past. So without doubt, the system is under stress and we are posed to the risk of a blackout. So that leads to the solution. The next term you're going to hear a lot about is orchestration. And this is where we have some magic black box which sits on your property, on your organisations or at your homes, and it's probably going to be embedded with some artificial intelligence. And what it's going to do, or try to do, is take, if you've got solar or if you've got some other generation that's sitting behind the meter, it's going to think about what storage device is going to be sitting also behind the meter. So what's going to happen is we're seeing the fall of storage remarkably fall at a very rapid rate, and it won't be long before it becomes a very mainstream installation. Here's your battery to go with your rooftop solar. That smart box will then choose when it heats up your electric hot water. So for those who have migrated across to gas, guess what? When it fails, you'll be asking the question, should I jump across back to electricity where you might have been in the first place? And you'll be using that daytime power to charge your electric hot water at a relatively low cost. It'll then temper with your air conditioning. It'll stop the compressor running outside, so you still have the fan running inside, or it'll change the set point on your air conditioning unit to move it by a degree or two to reduce the draw on the grid. It'll then say if you've got a pool pump, well, all that discretionary load, I'm going to control that and I'm going to turn it off. It'll then say when you've got your electric motor vehicle one day, I'm going to choose when I charge that, and I'm going to anticipate when you're going to want to drive out of the driveway. And all this orchestration will enable us to deliver a lower cost power into the system. And it's happening already. So we have these what's called virtual power plants. Every major retailer is involved in them. Energy Australia, Origin Energy, AGL, who's one of the exhibitors here today. Arena's sponsoring a lot of them. The governments get involved. There's a whole series of pilot programs going on doing this very thing of orchestration. I'd like to give you a quote from Catherine Tanner, who's the MD at Energy Australia and also sits on our reserve board. Catherine said the other day when I went to a conference or a forum, she said, the cheapest new power station is the one we don't have to build. I thought that's a beauty. That's exactly what it is. So what does that mean? Let me bring you back to your lawnmower. This is a shot at Australia's favourite hardware store, and certainly mine. I look down that aisle and every one of those lawnmowers is battery operated. The prime real estate is battery operated lawnmowers, not one petrol one. They're there on the other side, but the ones that are commandeering the major profile are batteries. It may not be your next car, but the one after that is more than likely to be an electric car. Solar technology is moving really fast. That we have solar roof tiles, we have solar glass. Your house or your building, you're going to rethink about the way you cool that or the way you heat that. And you'll probably move into preconditioning. So if your house at home, if it's a hot day and you're at work, you'll precondition your house, you'll drop the temperature using your solar power with your battery storage. So when you get home, it doesn't have to work as hard and will avoid the evening prices. Your buildings that you will manage will now be conscious of what's going on outside in the grid. We are facing a massive expenditure in re-engineering our transmission system. This is a plot of the proposed projects that are mooted. So out of the snowy region, basically, with the establishment of so-called Snowy 2.0, we will then, it's proposed to build a new link, a Hume link, going into Sydney, a river link shooting across to South Australia, the Kerrang link, which will sweep around back into Victoria, and then a second underwater cable joining Victoria with Tasmania. The cost of these projects is something like $14 billion at the very end of the top end estimates, made up of about 6 from interconnectors and another 7 from pump stations. We are facing massive cost to re-engineer how and when we consume energy. We are at risk that the cost structure we will end up with is extremely high fixed cost and very low marginal cost. Because we've built infrastructure we think we need. And there's an open question of whether that is true. What does that mean for us? We're facing this challenge that if we can pursue and capture the benefits of orchestration, recognising, do we spend money on interconnectors, which are a regulated asset, which never get written down, which you as consumers will pay for? We could end up with a cost structure that's heavily skewed to, I don't care whether you use any energy, you've got to pay just to be connected. But to crystallise the value of orchestration, we have to work out how we can sustain a cyber attack. So what if we had all this great orchestration and it got hacked? It could actually bring down the grid. It's a scary prospect. But we also are conscious we need to watch energy poverty, both individually and organisationally. We think of summer, we know if we lose power, it creates great heat stress on individuals, most likely prone, the elderly, but it also causes lots of grief for organisations. We move into winter. The last thing we want as a community is for someone not to turn on the heater because they can't afford the power bill. The last thing we want organisations to do is not use energy when they could. So what's the next steps? We have an energy trilemma. We are trying to balance, we want sustainability, we want reliability, and we want affordability. And if we can achieve those goals, we'll have a happy face. But that's the trilemma we're trying to solve. So, this brings me to you. What can you do? The first thing is, you've got to accept a more complex pricing structure. The retailers in the market have done us no favours by persevering with a peak and off-peak tariff structure all year round, 7 days a week. In the middle of 2021, the wholesale market will move to 5-minute pricing. It's currently at 30, it'll move to 5-minute. That means there's 105 price points throughout the year, 105,000 price points. And what are we carrying? Consumers, you have a 2 price point. It doesn't make any sense we persevere with you having a very blunt price signal. You want a sharp price signal to drive behaviour changes, organisational changes. It will accelerate your energy efficiency programs because you'll be able to extract the value more easily and readily. We're not doing ourselves any favours persevering it. So we have to change to accept complexity in pricing. The second thing you need to do, I suggest, is to speak up. So our governments have a poor track record in setting energy policy. And what is clear, that organisations are pulling our federal government in particular. Of all persuasions, I'm not here to bag the current coalition party, it's true of both persuasions. Organisations have been trying to voice about a carbon price. Many large organisations have been pushing, calling for it, and yet we still don't have it. It has to be led by the consumers and organisations. And I'll put it to you that you use you've used Procurement Australia to be your procurement agent. You should also think about using them to be your voice, to lobby. And I think of the voices and how they've changed, how the gender mix of the voices have changed. Chloe Munro is the head of our Energy Security Board. Catherine Tanner is head of Energy Australia. Audrey Zimmerman is head of our market operator. We need to embrace the change. The third thing you need to do is not only talk, but act. And I think Procurement Australia is well positioned to help you do that in a number of different forms. And like I said, energy procurement, it's a fascinating field. It's where I earn a living, true, but it's got lots of complexity, lots of challenge, and it's an issue that affects everyone on the street. And we need to accept that we need behavioural and organisational change because we need to capitalise on what we've got to do. So, therefore, my final parting word is we need to be ready to act. Thank you.
We've got a couple of minutes, so I'll pose some questions to you. Can more wind and less solar power generation reduce the duck curve effect? Are we investing in the wrong technology for our company and for it?
It's true that the more wind will reduce the duck curve. Yes, that is true. But also, obviously, solar is much more reachable. That is, it can go anywhere. And as we see the emergence of different types of solar, I've heard of roadways, solar roadways. I don't know how that works, but anyway. But we will see retrofit of buildings, glass buildings. They'll have solar glass, so it's much more accessible. So I think it's a question of how we harness that rather than not have it.
Okay. We have the second highest population in the country, yet our electricity prices are higher than New South Wales and other states. Higher demand should mean lower prices, no?
In a market where you have sort of infinite supply, higher demand would probably lead to lower prices because you get some cost efficiencies. But if the supply is more restricted, that's not true. So Victoria's facing the challenge, for those in Victoria. We will take over the mantle of the highest priced state in the NEM within 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. And finally, my local council is implementing a free electrical power station for electric cars, free for 1 year. Do you know of any other councils with this sort of program?
No, I don't explicitly know, but what we need to blend with that is the amount of charging power that's required to charge a car quickly is actually quite a lot of power. And so we need to think about the technology we use to drive those charging stations so we can manage it. In other words, if we were to put storage with those charging stations, so we're pulling the energy to charge the storage device in the middle of the day, and then when you go in to plug your car in and you want to fill it up in 5-10 minutes or whatever the charging time is, and you want a lot of power quickly, at least we've pulled it at a lower cost of the day.
Like a Harvey Norman commercial dishwasher.
Exactly.
Just for you, Paula. No, it's just for you. All right. Wow. Thanks again, Carl.
Okay.